Hi guys, welcome to Prep Nuggets CFA Level 1 course on fixed income. Fixed income is one of the largest segments of global financial markets. In this first topic, we shall be introduced to the elements that define and characterize fixed income securities. In this lesson, we shall go through the basic features of a bond. We start off with a quick overview of fixed income securities, followed by a broad discussion of the 5 main features of a bond, the most common type of fixed income security. Let's get started. A fixed income security is an instrument that allows a borrower to borrow money from a lender. The most common type of fixed income security is a bond. A bond is a contractual agreement between the bond issuer and the bond holders. There are 3 important elements that an investor needs to know about when investing in a bond. Firstly, the bond's features. This include the issuer, maturity, par value, coupon rate and frequency, and currency denomination. These features determine the bond's scheduled cash flows and therefore are key determinants of the investor's expected and actual return. Next, the legal, regulatory and tax considerations that apply to the contract between the issuer and the bondholders. And thirdly, the contingency provisions that may affect the bond's scheduled cash flows. These contingency provisions are stated options in the contract. They give the issuer or the bondholders certain rights regarding the disposal or redemption of the bond. In this lesson, we shall learn a bond's basic features, how to measure the yield of a bond, and have an overview of the various types of coupon structures. The other 2 elements, the legal, regulatory and tax considerations, and the contingency provisions, shall be discussed in the coming lessons. The first feature of a bond is quite obviously that it must identify who the issuer of the bond is. There are several types of entities that can issue bonds to obtain capital. They can be broadly classified into 3 main sectors: the government sector, the corporate sector, and the structured finance sector. The government sector can include either sovereign nation governments or government-related entities. Supranational entities are government-related organizations that operate globally. The World Bank and the International Monetary Fund have been known to be active bond issuers to fund their programs. Several sovereign nation governments issue bonds to fund some of their budget. A prime example is US Treasury bonds, but many sovereign nations like Singapore issue sovereign bonds to investors. Non-sovereign governments are government entities that are not national governments. Examples of such entities include the state of California or the city of Toronto. Quasi-government entities are government-related organizations that secure their own funding outside of government budget. A good example is the Federal National Mortgage Association in the US, better known as Fannie Mae. Corporate bonds are issued by the private sector. They're commonly divided into those issued by financial companies such as banks and insurance companies, and those issued by non-financial companies. The structured finance sector mainly comprises special legal entities that securitize assets to create a special class of bonds known as asset-backed securities. We shall discuss in detail what asset-backed securities are in a subsequent lesson. The maturity date of a bond is the date on which the principal is to be repaid. Once a bond has been issued, the time remaining until maturity is referred to as the term to maturity or tenor of a bond. When bonds are issued, their terms to maturity can be as short as 1 day or as long as 30 years or more. Historically, however, there have been bonds issued with maturities of as long as 100 years, but these are not common. Bonds with original maturities of 1 year or less are referred to as money market securities. Bonds with original maturities of more than 1 year are referred to as capital market securities. Some bonds don't have a maturity date. They are sometimes known as perpetual bonds. Such bonds make periodic interest payments but do not promise to repay the principal amount. The par value of a bond is the principal amount that will be repaid at maturity. It's also referred to as the face value, maturity value, redemption value, or principal value of a bond. All these refer to the same thing. Bonds prices are commonly quoted as a percentage of par. For example, a bond with a par value of $1,000 quoted at 103 is selling for $1,030. A bond that is selling for more than its par value is said to be trading at a premium to par. A bond that is selling at less than its par value is said to be trading at a discount to par, and a bond that is selling for exactly its par value is said to be trading at par. The coupon rate on a bond is the annual percentage of its par value that will be paid to bondholders. So if the par value is $100 and the coupon rate is X, the bond pays X dollars every year. If a bond makes payments annually, the full X dollars will be paid out at the end of each year. If a bond pays semi-annually, half the amount is paid out at the end of every 6 months. There are bonds which make quarterly payments or even monthly payments. The most common, however, is semi-annual payments. Bonds are issued in many currencies. Sometimes borrowers from countries with volatile currencies issue bonds denominated in US dollars to make them more attractive to a wide range of investors. Both the coupon payments and par value are in US dollars. For example, an Indonesian firm might issue US dollar denominated bonds to secure funding from international investors, even if its primary dealing currency is the local currency. A dual currency bond makes coupon interest payments in one currency and the principal repayment at maturity in another currency. A currency option bond gives bondholders a choice of which two currencies they would like to receive their payments in. Now that we've learnt the 5 main features of a bond, let's look at some examples of how bonds are structured. In this example, the bond's tenor is 2 years. It has a par value of $1,000 and a coupon rate of 8%, which is paid out semi-annually. So half a year after initiation, the first coupon of $40 is paid out, and this continues every half a year until the maturity date. At the end of the second year, the par value of $1,000 is returned to the bondholder, plus the last coupon of $40. This type of bond is known as a plain vanilla bond, where coupon is paid regularly and the full par value returned on maturity. One important metric that an investor is interested in is the yield of a bond. The price of a bond may fluctuate after it is issued. At issuance, the yield is equal to the coupon rate, but when the price deviates from the par value, the yield of the bond is no longer the coupon rate. An investor that buys the bond at the current market price will be interested to know what the yield of the bond is that he is buying. There are several yield measures commonly used by market participants. One simple measure is the current yield, which is equal to the bond's annual coupon divided by the bond's price. In this case, we divide the $80 annual coupon by the current price of $1,030 to get the current yield of 7.8%. One shortcoming of such a measure is that it does not consider the fact that the price of the bond will go back to $1,000 at maturity. In this case, the investor gets back just $1,000 and not the $1,030 that he paid. A much better and the most commonly referenced yield measure is the yield to maturity. It's often considered an estimate of the annual return that an investor will earn on a bond if this investor purchases the bond today and holds it until maturity. The yield to maturity is the internal rate of return on a bond's expected cash flows. What we're trying to find is this discount rate, R, that equates the present value of the bond's expected cash flows until maturity with the bond's price. Refer to the course on quantitative methods to revise how to calculate the internal rate of return. Using the cash flow calculator, we get R as 2.44%. As each period here is half a year, this is actually the semi-annual yield. Simply multiply this figure by 2 to get the annual yield. Notice that the yield to maturity of 4.88% is much lower than the current yield of 7.8%. This is because the yield to maturity takes into account the loss of the $30 from the amount that the investor has committed. The yield to maturity is inversely related to the bond's price. The higher the bond's price, the lower its yield to maturity, and vice versa. We shall cover yield to maturity in greater detail in a later lesson. And that concludes this introductory lesson. We've learnt the 5 main basic features of a bond. In the subsequent lessons, we shall look at the various types of coupon structures. See you again.